It's time to introduce the first panel of the day, which will focus on disability rights in Europe. So please help me to welcome the panel moderator who will lead the discussion, the director of the new Swedish National Human Rights Institution, Fredrik Malmberg. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lotta. It's wonderful to be here, and I would like to welcome our panelists forward to the first panel of this conference with the title Disability Rights in Europe, the Way Forward. As mentioned, my name is Fredrik Malmberg, and I'm since January this year the director of the Swedish National Human Rights Institution. And I'm very honored to moderate this panel today with so many distinguished speakers, including online, Mr. Gerard Quinn, the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, and Mrs. Katarina Ivankovic-Knezevic, DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion at the European Commission, Mrs. Abir Al-Sahlani, she's on the way, she will arrive soon, member of the European Parliament, and Mr. Alejandro Moledo, Deputy Director of the European Disability Forum. All the panelists today have an important role to play in the implementation and monitoring of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities within the European Union. And I'm very much looking forward to discussing this with the panel within short. But first, a few words about the Convention and 5 of its unique features. It's ratified by the European Union. It marks a paradigm shift in attitudes. It involves the primary stakeholders. It recognizes diversity. And last, it's the only treaty that provides for monitoring also at the national level. Let me develop this a bit further. Since the adoption in 2006, the CRPD has been ratified by 186 state parties, and that makes it one of the most widely ratified human rights treaties in history. And in 2010, the European Union became the first regional organization to commit to the treaty. The Convention also makes a paradigm shift in attitudes and approaches to persons with disabilities. It endorses a so-called social model that recognizes disability as the result of the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers. Another key feature of the Convention is the right of persons with disabilities to be actively involved in all matters that concern them. This lies at the heart of the Convention, I would say, or as it's summarized, nothing about us without us. Another key aspect has been developed through the Convention is an approach to equality, which recognizes that people with disabilities, of course not, are not a homogeneous group, and that needs and experiences are diverse. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities provides for monitoring of the implementation of the Convention, both at the international and national level. In Article 33, the Convention introduces a structure designed for implementation and monitoring of the Convention, including a focal point for the implementation of the Convention on behalf of the state party, an independent monitoring mechanism, the involvement of persons with disability and organizations that represent them. And this inclusion of a norm in Article 33 detailing national implementation and monitoring structures and their function at national level is unprecedented in the Human Rights Treaty. By focusing not only on international monitoring, but also on national monitoring, CRPD created a shift of paradigm. The Swedish National Human Rights Institution, for which I'm the director, has been formally designated with this monitoring mandate in Sweden. Within the European Union, the monitoring mechanism consists of the European Parliament, the Fundamental Rights Agency, the European Ombudsman, and the European Disability Forum. And the designated EU focal point, and thus representing the so-called state party, is the European Commission. The monitoring arrangement within the European Union is obviously very interesting, since it so far represents, as I mentioned, the only regional version of an Article 33 arrangement. And I think we all present at this conference today would agree that monitoring is of utmost importance. It is key to advancing the rights in a way that they have an impact in the daily lives of persons with disabilities. Welcome, by the way. Now I hope that you all are as excited as I am to listen to our panelists. But first, just a few words about the setup of today's discussion. First, we will start with a panel discussion where each panelist will be given the opportunity to present their views on a few topics of relevance. Then I will, of course, give the opportunity to you as an audience to ask questions to our panel. And that includes both our audience that follow us online, welcome to all of you, and our audience here in Stockholm. If you are online, a chat moderator will gather your questions. And here in Stockholm, staff from EDF, and you saw them before, they are around here. They will assist me identifying any speakers in this room. When you prepare your questions, let me remind you to please keep your questions short and to direct them to preferably only one person in the panel. This in order to open the possibility for as many questions as possible. But now it's time for our panel, and please give a warm hand to our panel today. And I would like to start by asking each one of you to present yourself and how you describe your role in implementation and monitoring disability rights in Europe. You have 3 minutes each, and I will knock on the table when you have 30 seconds left to speak. And let's start with Gerard. Please, welcome. You're online.
Sorry, good morning. Congratulations, moderator, on setting up the Swedish National Human Rights Institution, which will have a critical role to play in monitoring in the future in Sweden. So it's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Gerard Quinn. I'm the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities. We have 3 core tasks as special rapporteurs. One is to provide timely reports on contemporary issues that may have not obtained the attention that they should have. And as it turns out, one of those issues is the potential harms and also the risks and opportunities of artificial intelligence. So I'm especially happy to be with you today. And a second major task of special rapporteurs is to undertake intensive country visits. And for these purposes, the European Union counts as a country in UN terminology, because of course the European Union has ratified the UN CRPD. So approximately 1 year ago, I undertook one of these intensive 2-week country visits to the institutions of the European Union. Our focus is not to arrive at definitive legal judgments about how a country or an entity is doing, but to draw up a report highlighting areas where we think more action could happen and to be of assistance to the country in navigating its way forward. Our third task is communications, which is UN speak for entertaining collective and group complaints from around the world on particular countries, and then to interact privately and bilaterally with those countries to seek an amicable solution. So I'm basically here this morning to talk to you about the report we compiled on that EU country visit. We presented it to the UN Human Rights Council about 2 weeks ago in Geneva, so it's very fresh. And there was an interesting exchange and debate on it, and I'll be happy to fill you in once we allow other members of the panel to introduce themselves. So thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Gerard. Now let's move on to the so-called state party to the Convention in the European Union, represented by Katarina from the European Commission. How would you describe your role in the implementation of the CRPD?
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All is fine? Yeah, good. So, good morning to all. My name is Katarina Ivankovic-Knezevic. I'm Director for Social Rights and Inclusion in the Directorate General for Employment, Social Policy and Inclusion. And I would dare to say that my role and the role of my directorate is to coordinate the work of the EU as a focal point for the UN CRPD. And also it is our role to make sure that principles from the CRPD are translated into EU strategy for the rights of the persons with disabilities. And then I would dare to say the most important role that my directorate and unit for the disability and inclusion has is to turn these principles and strategies into concrete actions. And I'm very happy that I will be sharing with you which concrete actions are we undertaking, what is on the table, what has been achieved, and what is in our pipeline. So I would be super quick, and I hope I was clear about the role of EU Commission. And indeed, we are, as Fredrik rightly mentioned, we are still the only regional organization that is a state party of the CRPD. And we are very proud to be in such a position and also share all the responsibilities with the member states in the implementing UN CRPD. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so impressed you are not even using the time that I allow you, but we are moving on. Thank you, Katarina. The European Parliament is one of the parties in the monitoring mechanism for the implementation of the CRPD. And our next speaker is Abir, member of the European Parliament and active in the Disability Intergroup. Please tell us how you see your role.
Maybe now? Better? Okay, good morning to you all, and apologies for being delayed. I drove here and it was an accident during my, there was stop in the traffic. Nevertheless, I am from the European Parliament member since 2019. And before that, as a liberal, I always strive to have, to build a liberal world where everyone is equal. And that is my ideological focal point when it comes to the rights of persons with disabilities. But also as a mother to a child who has a disability, it became also a personal fight for me. And that's why my work in the European Parliament has two main focuses, especially that I could also make reality of in our report on disability rights that we adopted not so long time ago. And it was two main perspectives that I tried to focus on. One of them is crisis management to be inclusive. And that was because of the war on Ukraine on one hand, and also post the corona pandemic that we saw that persons with disabilities were not prioritized when it came to emergency medical treatment And when it comes to the war, we saw that persons with disabilities perspectives were not included in, for example, evacuations and rescue missions and so on. And unfortunately, we saw that also in the earthquake in both Turkey and Syria, that these persons were not included in their perspectives and challenges were not included in the crisis management. So these two issues were very, very important to me to work on, very, hands-on. But also when I was elected first in 2019, one of my promises to my electorate, to my voters, was to make politics accessible, both to be a part of politics, but also to be able to cast your vote as European citizens in the European Union. And we also succeeded in including that in our report, legislative report, and also being a part of the delegation, European Parliament delegation to the CRPD yearly summit that we have in the UN, New York. So I follow that, very, very thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Abir. Now representing the right bearers through the European Disability Forum, Alejandro, how would you describe your role in the implementation and monitoring of the rights?
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me well? Yes? Good. So many thanks once again to our Swedish member for joining forces with us in organizing this great conference. To answer your question in very, very short, I would say that our role is, we are the driving force, I believe, on how the EU implements the CRPD. Last year, EDF celebrated its 25th anniversary. And it coincided back then when the EU introduced for the first time persons with disabilities in the Lisbon Treaty. And since then, we've seen that there's been progress at EU level. So throughout these years, we've seen how the EU and EU competencies are increasingly present in our everyday lives. So throughout this process and these decades, EDF, as the representative organization of the European disability movement, is being pushing and advocating for further rights of persons with disabilities, with the mission of realizing the motto that you were mentioning at the beginning, nothing about us without us. The representative of different disability organizations in Europe were also involved in the preparation and the adoption of the CRPD. And obviously, EDF and its members, we've been very active in ensuring that there is a universal ratification of the CRPD in the EU. So not only by all member states, but also by the EU itself. So the way in which we approach the implementation of the CRPD is by ensuring that the perspectives of our members of persons with disabilities are taken into consideration and included and involved in the development of the policies that affect their lives. And the way we do it is, on the one hand, to call for a specific disability-related legislation, but also, which is very important, to incorporate the obligations and the spirit of the CRPD in other sectorial legislation. This would be the advocacy work that we do towards the EU institutions, towards the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council of the EU. And in addition to that, we also participate in the monitoring framework of the EU. And more importantly, we also work, obviously, hand in hand with our members to build the capacity of the European disability movement in ensuring that these policies that we will discuss today actually have an effect in our everyday lives. So in these two kind of important domains, we focus our energies. And I believe that most of the progress that have been happening in these 25 years has been also thanks to the strength and the commitment and the capacity of persons with disabilities and the representative organizations. So if I can start with already like a recommendation to the state parties, is that they need to invest on and recognize the expertise and the added value of involving the disability community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Very interesting. You talked about the progress that we've seen during the last 25 years. And it's very interesting now to hear from you, Gerard. You have recently visited the European Union in your role and examined the rights of persons with disabilities. Hearing about the progress the last 25 years, what is your opinion of the state of the union right now?
Yeah, I think it's important that people have commented on how the European Union is in our everyday lives. And I think it's really important to understand that the reason why has something to do with the fact that it's a market integration organization with incredible powers in the internal market. And it has also something to do with the equality provisions of the Lisbon Treaty. And it's the combination of those market powers with those equality powers that makes the European Union so incredibly important. The reason I wanted to visit the European Union institutions was to highlight the role of regional action to, as it were, magnify the impact of national action. And that is really important around the world. We now see UNESCAP in Asia Pacific stepping up. We see the Arab countries beginning to really combine their efforts to try and ensure they add value to each member state. So the lessons of the European Union ripple far and wide around the world, and people pay attention to what's happening. We examined in our country visit and in our report the history of European Union engagement with the international community. And we found that right from the very beginning, right from the early 1990s, there has been a delicate dance between EU law and policy at the international level. So this is nothing new. This has to do with the relationship between the European Union and the world, going back, I would say, 3 decades. And what the ratification of the convention does is it really accelerates that. We also were minded to look at the European Union because obviously it has tremendous legal capacity and power to act, albeit within relatively narrow fields, but it also has the capacity to assist its member states. Always remember there's a duty of sincere cooperation when it comes to mixed conventions, treaties ratified both by, let's say, Sweden and by the European Union. And also the European Union has tremendous financial capacity to underwrite the process of change, something we focused on quite closely in our country visit. And lastly, because the European Union has all of these combined capacities, future risks, future shocks, including conflict, artificial intelligence, and so on, the European Union has the capacity to anticipate these and to plan for them and to include persons with disabilities. To make a very long story short, we found that the mass of law and public policy in the European Union was trending in the right direction. Where we found problems was the lack of recognition of sign language at the European Union level. The European Federation of the Deaf pressed that point very eloquently. we also found that there were challenges in the member states that had nothing to do directly with EU level competence, but the EU could have a role in helping its member states and should have a role in helping its member states. And one of the classic issues there was the move towards supported decision-making to replace guardianships throughout Europe. We thought that much more could be done to, as it were, accelerate that trend throughout Europe. We made particular recommendation that if the European Union or member states ratify the Hague Convention on quote-unquote incapable adults, that it does so with very important reservations and declarations to make sure that the implementation is fully in line with the UN Disability Treaty. And I will end on this point because the area that was most disappointing to us was the continued expenditure of European taxpayers' monies on institutionalization. Now, I know there's a golden opportunity coming up shortly with the drafting of the EU guidelines on deinstitutionalization. I hope we use that as an occasion to reverse some trends over the past decade or two. And that was our main concern, I believe. We were very impressed with the European Union in the world and how, for example, the External Action Service is beginning to step up engagement around the world on disability issues. We made pointed recommendations how this could be accelerated and continued and crystallized, but we thought that trend was in the right direction. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Very interesting report, so many interesting things that you are highlighting right now. And I think that one of the issues that you mentioned, I would like to pick up that issue and ask a question to Katarina from the European Commission about it. And this is in your report, you highlight the use of EU funds for investment in residential institutions instead of community-based services, which would enable a community living. What are the planned measures, Katarina, in the future to tackle these investments, would you say?
Big thanks to Gerard for his visit first, and it was a very timely visit because it happened at the time that we were preparing actually our report on the UN CRPD, which we will submit to the CRPD committee in a quite a short time by mid-April. So the visit together with the questions that we received was forming a really good synergy. Before going to your question, let me just reflect on two elements that Gerard mentioned. One is the role of the EU as the regional organization, as a state party. And some of you might remember that last year during the COSP, the Conference of the State Parties, the EU has organized the panel with the other regional organizations in order really to show and forecast what is and why it is important to be a state party of the CRPD. And we are continuing intensively working with the other regional organizations as well. On the question that was mentioned regarding the guardianship, I really recommend all of you to read the study that actually Special Rapporteur has commissioned on the relationship between the Hague Convention and CRPD, with a clear spelling out which one prevails when certain questions come to the point and come to be asked. And it's also very important to have these questions, and that CRPD as really lex specialis should prevail, especially when it comes to the questions on the guardianship. What I can tell you that us at the EU level, we will be looking a bit more in depth to this question in a months and years to come. Now on your concrete questions when it comes to the processes of deinstitutionalization, and I would dare to say very sensitive and very important topic to not only to every person with disabilities, but to everyone who lives, works, and has anything to do with this person with disability. And this transformation from, as we can call it institutions, to community-based and home-based and supported living is something that is very important to us. It's very important to the EU, and we really do see this period, and we could speak about the fact is the period of transformation from the institutional to the individual services, and from the long stay residential to community living. Is it long, or is it too long, or should the member states have done it faster and quicker? But what is very important to have in mind that, first of all, EU has a strong commitment and shares with member states that living in the community and investing in the community is extremely important. If we look, for example, the ESF funding, European Social Fund, which is the main fund to support such so-called soft measures, which are not considered the built environment, etc., we have allocated in this financial period for support to the family and community-based care services and support to the staff of these services. The member states have programmed 2.6 billion of ESF plus measures to support the delivery of family and community-based care services. This is a significant amount of money, and this shows also that ESF is fully directed to the community-based services and supported services. And when I say community-based, I mean it all: personal assistance, everything that needs to be implemented, that a person receives assistance at home or in some other forms of the community-based services. Should I conclude? It's a very important question.
Yeah, it's a very important
question. It's
question.
a very important question, and I will be very quick, but it's important also to say some of the elements. Shared management, direct management means in the shared management we share the responsibility with the member states. CRPD is a horizontal enabling condition, which means that member states have to implement activities in line with CRPD throughout the financial period. So one thing before I finish is, Jerry mentioned that towards the end of this year, we will be issuing so-called guidance on the independent living and what is considered independent living and how it could be supported with EU funding. Why it is a good opportunity? It will be for sure inspired by the guidelines that CRPD committee has issued on the Article 19 and implementation of the CRPD, and also it will have quite a clear understanding of what independent living in the EU means, how could it be supported with EU funding, and what should be done in the future. Also, many of you might ask, like, what is happening with not only cohesion funding, ESF or ERDF, what is happening with next generation EU and recovery and resilience facility and plans? Well, they also need to be in line with CRPD, and that's also very important to have in mind. Yes. So I would stop here. And happy to reply on any question.
Thank you. It's so interesting to listen to you, but I'm so eager to also open up for questions from the audience. That's why I'm a bit in a hurry. But we have, before I open up the floor, I would like to give Abir the opportunity from your point of view as a member of European Parliament. What do you see as the immediate and long-term challenges in the European Union? Are there any concrete measures that we can hope for to see before the elections coming up?
Yes, I wanted to express my gratitude to EDF and Funktionsrätt Sverige for a very good cooperation during this mandate so far. It has been very valuable for us as parliamentarians to always have access to you and your knowledge and your expertise and your generous inputs always. And one of the issues that we always take on from our side in the parliament is actually the natural, but also very difficult to implement, apparently, equal access to our societies throughout the European Union and all its member states. And I cannot even start to imagine how difficult it is and exhausting to the whole time explain your different kind of disability, what kind of support you need, if you're going to the cinema or boarding a train or airplane. And that's why we believe that one measure that could make life more accessible and our societies more accessible is the proposal, also supported by the EDF and Funktionsrätt Sverige, is the card. I lost its name, the disability card. So that is one thing that is very practical, very hands-on, that can improve accessibility. And I know that the Commission is also looking into putting forward a legislative proposal, and that you can show, and then you get the help you need instead of you explaining, and putting the responsibility actually to make society accessible on society and not on yourself. So this is one of the issues that I hope that we can work on, that is very hands-on, and it will be groundbreaking, I believe, and I will be very active in working on this file to get the best possible outcome from it. One other issue that I believe that we need to think about is mainstreaming accessibility through all political decision-making that we are doing. And one of them that I have seen is lacking is actually when it comes to policing, to police cooperation, to preventing and protecting from violence. But that is for maybe a different seminar. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Abir. Alejandro, European Disability Forum represents a very diverse population with disabilities in Europe. And from the perspective of persons with disabilities in the European Union, what would you say are the most important issues to focus on right now?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think there is a gap between this obviously the CRPD and the policies we adopt, and then the effect that they have on our lives. And we have already discussed the use of European funds. We know that there are these enabling conditions and that the funds should be invested in the institutionalization and accessibility, but still we see many member states having different interpretations as for how to use the European funds. We do have an anti-discrimination legislation on employment and recently a minimum wage directive, but still we see many persons with disabilities working in shelter employment with no labor rights at all. We do have legislation on the passengers' rights, on accessibility, but we find many barriers to enjoy equal access to transport, or you can face denial of boarding for some by the airline because of some random safety reasons, or if they break your 50,000 euros wheelchair, they just give you back 1,000 euros just for compensation. We do see that the Commission presents a directive on combating violence against women, but they don't include a prohibition on forced sterilization. So one thing is the CRPD, one thing are the policies we adopt, and then the other thing is that how these actually are interpreted and implemented in practice. And here, I think the challenge, and sorry to go for the basic, but I think is the reality, is lack of political will. We see it many times when there is a good proposal from the Commission that the Parliament gets super ambitious. We are very grateful for their support and we cooperate with them very much. But then in the Council, our national governments basically water down most of the positive provisions that aim at including, high standards as for the CRPD. We also see the situation when there is a good directive at European level, but then, as you know, the directives need to be incorporated into national laws. And here is where different interpretations come into play, and suddenly we see that something that could have been really, really ambitious gets, a minimalistic approach as for how member states are incorporating this. And I guess we will hear some of this in the next panel on accessibility, because the Accessibility Act is a good example of that. So there is still much room for setting the mechanisms, the structures, and the resources in the EU institutions to cooperate with the disability movement in ensuring that the CRPD is well implemented. And this can also be applied to many, many member states as well. So we know, and we very much appreciate the leading role of Commissioner Dalli, because it's the first commissioner that is in her mission is explicitly mentioned that she's responsible for the implementation of the CRPD. And what we would like is in the next term to have a commissioner for equality with a robust set of resources, services, Directorate General that could support this work further and could be actually instrumental in mainstreaming, as we say, so incorporating the CRPD across all the policies that the Commission works on. But because at the end of the day, we want to be taken into consideration in all the policies that affect us. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Very important. Yes, the woman. Very important what you mentioned, to close the gap between the CRPD and the real political action, of course. Now, with 20 minutes left, approximately, I would very much like to open the floor for questions, of course. And please, I remind you, make the question very short, and I will ensure that the answers also from the panel will be very short and effective. So let's see. Who would like to take the floor first? And of course, if you're online, it's also possible to ask questions to the panel. And we have a moderator that will pick up your questions. Let's see, do we have any questions in the room? Yeah, we have a question here.
Marica Miric, Croatian Union of Persons with Disabilities. I'm very happy that we in Croatia put on the first line through ESF, European funds, the institutionalization. And also, I would like to ask Katarina when this independent living guidelines will be finished, because I can say now that we in Croatia did have a good political will. That happens, and I'm very happy. That happens again. I'm very happy. But I see that independent living is don't understand on right way. So I will be very happy to say this, to have such guidelines, to have the same way of understanding. Thank you.
Please, I think we got a few more questions, but Katarina, you remember the question that you just received?
Try again. There we go. Thank you. Maureen Piggott from Inclusion Europe, the Association of People with Intellectual Disability and their families. I'd like to ask Gerard what you would like to see the EU do to accelerate the implementation of decision, or to introduce and implement decision support in member states.
Thank you very much. Very short and effective questions. Very good. Maybe we pick up one more question. Do we have any questions online that we could add?
Good day, everybody. I'm Christian Grđan from Mental Health Europe, and I have a question for the panel. What will be and how will be the focus of the European Union to affirming mental health and rights of persons with mental health problems in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we take these three questions now, and should we start with you, Katarina?
Sure.
Sure. Thanks a lot, and thank you, Marica, for a very good question. As you know very much, I know the Croatian situation really in depth, and I believe that you are on the right path and keep pushing for very ambitious solutions, especially when it comes to the personal assistance. On the EU guidance, as I said, we plan to have the final version of the document towards the end of year. But there is no magic bullet that is going to be written in this guidance, because it will be, as I said, inspired by the interpretation of the UN of the Article 19, and this is the good source for all of you who are dealing now at a stage with reflecting on or having reforms in the area of independent living and what independent living is. What we aim to achieve is really to show what is and which direction member states should take when understanding what is community-based living, and how to overcome this transition process and how to lead with these transition processes. And one thing that I know that is not really the most loved topic is indeed this transition, and everybody feels that it's too long, it's taking too long, and that the period should be much shorter. But then when you come to the concrete, and I thank you very much, Alejandro, for being always a voice of reason, I would call it, and pushing us hard and showing that indeed how sometimes the most ambitious proposals get watered down, which hurts everybody, I would dare to say. But it is also very relevant to be fully aware where we are, and to be fully aware what it entails, and then put all of our efforts into really ending these transition processes as soon as possible. Commitment from the member states is crucial and will be crucial in addressing this issue, and this is definitely something I would like to emphasize. On the mental health,
move on to give the opportunity
Okay.
to more people to ask questions.
Sure,
so
fine.
very short answers. I think we have the question to Gerard, if it's okay, if I can let you in to answer that question.
Thank you so much. I'll be very brief. Thank you, Maureen, for that excellent question. I think there's already a lot of guidance from the UN on supported decision-making, but it's more at the level of generalities. What would be preferable would be some sort of intentional platform between the member states, including civil society, on blueprints for the way forward, because the new paradigm of supported decision-making throws up some of its own problematics, and we need a much better way of actually having a conversation with each other about how to handle them. Otherwise, we are going to get a patchwork quilt of supported decision-making throughout Europe, and perhaps even conflicts between different supported decision-making regimes. So we thought this is exactly an area where the EU can bring added value to the work of its member states. With respect to mental health, we were struck that there wasn't a clear European mental health strategy in favor of the movement away from all coercion, whether in terms of deprivation of liberty or forced treatment. Brazil and Portugal are leading the way on this in the UN system. The WHO is moving decisively in that direction. So it struck us as rather odd that there is this major gap of a lack of a clear EU mental health strategy in that direction. And if that is the direction, and I hope it is, then again, I think the European Union should try and assist its member states in dismantling some of the architecture of the past and moving toward a completely different system in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Katarina, I interrupted you when you were addressing the question about mental health, but would you also short comment on that question?
Yeah, super short on this one. As you know very much, our colleagues from DG Santé are leading on the mental health strategy, but we are also trying to put in line with CRPD, in line with EU strategy for the rights of the persons with disabilities, where you have a really clear, I would dare to say, pathways for mental health aspects and invisible disabilities, that they should be treated together in the mental health strategy. And I truly hope that next year, which will be proclaimed as European Year of Mental Health, is really going to increase the visibility of these topics, and it's really going to have some concrete outputs when it comes also to the mental health of everyone and persons with disabilities in particular. Thanks.
I know that we have a big audience following this event online, so I would like to see if you have any questions from our online audience as well.
Yes. So yes, we've got a few questions from online. This is Hayden from EDF. I'm sitting at the back of the room. I'll just ask the moderator how many questions we can take, because we have a few.
Questions and 3 short answers.
Okay, so I'll take 3 questions on different topics. Most of them are directed towards our speaker from the Commission, Katarina Ivankovic-Knezevic. The first one is, artificial intelligence is developing faster and faster. How can the European Commission keep up with legislation and monitoring that takes into account persons with disabilities, accessibility, and being inclusive? How is the Commission acting to prevent and develop the development of artificial intelligence from going faster than EU policymaking? So quite a technical question. We have another question that says, how does the panel, but Katarina especially, think that European Commission funding mechanisms such as Horizon Europe can promote disability rights? And then a final question on a different topic is a question about refugees with disabilities. What do you as panelists foresee to help and to implement the CRPD in this area?
Maybe start with the last question about refugees with disabilities, and who would like to pick up on that question? Yes, Abir.
Yes, thank you for the questions. When it comes to the question about refugees with disabilities, we just adopted a very big legislative package called the Migration Pact, 4 big legislations about both the procedures in our borders, but also the reception conditions, reallocation, and data collection. And one of the issues that we worked very hard on is the protection of vulnerable groups in the migration routes, and to detect as soon as possible, as fast as possible, people who are extra vulnerable, to be detected and to be also put in a different kind of procedure, not as the very fast track procedure, because then you need to put in both maybe medical assessment, you need to put different kind of legislation, judicial also assistance, and you need to take in account to different perspectives that have to be there. And our aim was to have an equal process, and to reach that equal process when it comes to refugee reception from A to Z is to have equal possibilities. And that's why we actually worked very hard on making that and ensuring that these sentences were in the proposed legislation. And now it is up to the 3 partial negotiations, and we hope that the member states and the council do not erase these kind of securities to ensure the rule of law, meaning everyone is equal when it comes to the law implementation.
Thank you very much. Alejandro, would you like to comment on the question about the EU funding mechanism, or should we? Or Katarina? Okay.
Thank Thanks a lot. I will try to reflect quickly on all three questions. So on artificial intelligence, actually there will be dedicated next panel on accessibility, and later you will be speaking about artificial intelligence. So that's why I will leave this question for my colleagues, but I share with you the view that artificial intelligence is running and moving much faster than any of us can envisage, and this is the real challenge to grasp. On the Horizon Europe and the financing, just to let you know that for a number of years, disability has been an integral part of the Horizon EU, and there have been calls and programs implemented within. What is also important that accessibility and disability are included not only in this one, but also in the other EU funding programs. So that's important to have in mind. We made sure how to do it with a number of instruments. One is called Better Regulation Toolbox, with a number of concrete actions that each DG has to undertake. We also have the Equality Task Force, which is working at the EU level and which is under direct guidance of Commissioner Dalli to mainstream equality and then to mainstream disability as well into all the actions and that Commission is undertaking. And last but not least, I would like to mention the disability coordinators, which have been appointed in each EU institution and which are in charge of mainstreaming disability in their respective institutions, and that's something important to have in mind. And on the refugees, I think this is a very important question. We have seen it from 24th of February last year when the war started, that it has been quite a topical question for all of those either being in Ukraine or being refugees in the EU member states. In the EU member states, we have seen different ways of dealing with it. We always promoted and promote the main principles of CRPD and also when it comes to the refugees. And another issue is that when it comes to Ukraine and the processes that will be undergoing in Ukraine, it's extremely important that the institutionalization processes of persons with disabilities and children are put in place and implemented within Ukraine. This is something that we are emphasizing in each and every time we meet Ukrainian authorities, we discuss with them. And also in this respect, I thank the voices of the civil society who have been also very talkative about this aspect, and we will continue to implement it at the times when DI is really going to be fully on the topic, on the agenda when it comes to the pre-accession negotiations, when it happens.
Thank you, everyone. I'm afraid our time is up. We could continue for hours, I would say, in this panel. It has been so interesting to listen to you. And I would like to, of course, to thank all the participants for your questions and the panel for the answers. I mean, there is no doubt that there is a strong commitment to advance disability rights in the European Union, I would say. I think a lot has been said today. We heard Gerard mentioning that EU has incredible powers with the internal market and also equality powers that can make things move. We heard Katarina mentioning how important it is to make the principles in the CRPD and translate them into concrete actions. We have heard a lot of that. And Abir, you mentioned two main perspectives in your work. The crisis management must be inclusive, looking at the war in Ukraine right now and the effects that has, and of course also at the pandemic, the two examples you mentioned. And Alejandro, you mentioned how important the European Disability Forum and the movement has been in the past, putting the rights of people with disabilities on the agenda. And I'm sure that will happen also in the future, as we heard today. So thank you very much, everyone. And I think it's time for what we in Sweden called fika. And I would like to give the floor to Lotta, so you can introduce us to the fika tradition. So thank you. A warm hand for the fantastic panel. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting panel and a good work from Fredrik, who led the panel in time. That's the most important thing today, in time. Yeah. So, and as Fredrik said, now it's the first coffee break or fika. It's one word you need to have to bring home from Sweden. Fika is very important, don't you say? Yeah.